What does the portfolio management tool in an RIA tech stack do? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 136. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where we help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all the resources we make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we're talking about a component of what's often referred to as a tech stack in the RIA space, specifically the quote-unquote portfolio management component of a tech stack. So as a little backstory, there are literally hundreds of fintech solutions out in the marketplace now that RIAs have available to them to potentially use. And they do all kinds of different things. And by a couple dozen different categories of tools. Now, no matter all the bells and whistles and all the different solutions out there, typically a so-called RIA tech stack is made up of three core pieces. Now, before I tell you what those three core pieces is, let me walk you through typically where that tech stack comes into place. So a typical arrangement with an RIA, and this depends on the custodian you choose, which I'll come back to in a second, is where you choose a custodian and then you perhaps build separate from the custodian, again, what's referred to as a tech stack, which is your tools for most of the interactions that you're going to have interaction with your client and facilitate in the different services that you're providing for them. In that scenario, again, it's typically most of it's independent from the custodian. And so within that tech stack that you've built, perhaps choosing from these hundreds of different options out there, again, three main core pieces of that technology. So those three are a CRM, a financial planning, and then today's topic, it typically referred to as a portfolio management tool. And so you've probably heard of names like Orion, Black Diamond, Advizon, Tamarack, Circle Black. Those are often thought of as so-called portfolio management tools, and that's what we're going to be getting into on today's episode of exactly what is it these tools actually are doing. And like I said a moment ago, this in part will depend on what custodian you choose for your RIA. I just recently did an episode on many of the considerations that go into how to choose the best custodian for your RIA. So take a look at that as well. But basically depends on the technology that your custodian provides for you will dictate how much of a tech stack that you need to be building on your own as well. And so you might not actually even need a portfolio management tool dependent on the custodian that you've chosen. Again, check out that episode as well. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. So just know that while a portfolio management tool is used in many instances, it's not used in all instances. But I do want to dive into what it is where it does make sense. So as a little backstory of how we got to this point of having this portfolio management tool, I'm going to get into what exactly that does for you. You go back far enough, 10 plus years ago, and if you go back far enough, there wasn't nearly the fintech solutions even remotely that support the RIA model that they do today. The tech landscape has evolved tremendously over the years. But there was a time when you were building technology for an RIA, building that technology stack, that kind of every tool out there was kind of a single purpose tool. You went to one piece of software to create performance reports for your clients. You went to another piece of software to create a fee bill, to run the fee billing for the clients, and maybe another one to do traded and rebalancing. And over time, perhaps because of competitive pressures, due to opportunities, you have these firms, some of which I named, again, the Orion, Black Diamond, Advizons of the world, that said, hey, let's start bundling some of those pieces up together. And so in some instances, they built those tools out themselves. In other instances, they acquired some of these standalone tools and brought them all together under this generic sounding portfolio management tool that actually does several things. And so as we continue to see this evolve, you get this more and more bundled solution that you have one tech tool for a big part of your needs in that tech stack. So what exactly did they piece together or build? So they give you just a little list here of common features of a portfolio management tool, but by no means is this a complete solution set. As they would tell you, that they'd be happy to do demos for you. They've now evolved this. They do all kinds of fancy bells and whistles and a lot of cool stuff. But some of the main pieces of a portfolio management tool include the following. So first is to do the trade-in and rebalancing. So perhaps you create models or using models that they've created, or you can tap into third-party models they've procured that you can assign accounts to and do model trade-in, if you will. Or if you want to do rebalancing across multiple accounts of yours all at once, that trade-in, rebalancing, kind of model implementation, think of that as typically done within that portfolio management tool. And if anything, that's the one that fits the name most closely, that you're managing the portfolio. So actually facilitating the trade-in, but with a lot of scale. It's preventing you or saving you from necessarily having to go in each individual account every time you want to do a trade. Again, perhaps you're doing significant rebalancing across the board. So the first main part of portfolio management is that trade-in rebalancing component. Next up, they typically all have that client fee billing feature. So as a reminder, a typical setup with many of the custodians, not all, is the custodian relies on you as the RIA to instruct them on how much to deduct from the client's account for your fee. Now we're starting to see more and more different types of fee schedules used, but to use the most common example, and possibly or likely what you're using now, particularly if you're a large broker-dealer firm, is that traditional quarterly fee bill, and it might be in arrears, might be in advance. There's different ways to calculate it. But the idea being that with many of the custodians, they basically sit back, for lack of a better term, and say, hey, RIA, go ahead and tell us when you want us to deduct the fee and how much to deduct, and we will do that and remit it back to you. And so you need some way to do that. Now you go back far enough, some of that was done manually on spreadsheets where RIAs were downloading basically client data at the end of each quarter, doing a VLOOKUP maybe on a separate spreadsheet they have of what each client fee billing is or fee is, running that math and then submitting it back to the custodian for processing. A lot of that is much more efficient nowadays and driven by technology. And so that is another core piece of a portfolio management tool, is to process your fee billing for you. And they become very sophisticated, so they typically will offer far more options than just the traditional maybe quarterly in advance or whatever the case may be. Now there's typically ways to do it monthly. There's different ways to calculate, is it a daily average over the period of time? Is it a end of the quarter, end of the month value? So they've become very sophisticated, but that is a core piece of a portfolio management tool, is to run your client fee billing. Again, provided you're using a custodian that's not built into what the custodian does. Again, both of those flavors exist out there. Another feature common with portfolio management tools is to run performance reports. So as an RIA, one of the kind of cornerstone aspects of an RIA is that the role of custody in almost every instance is separate from the RIA, hence why you have a third-party custodian that holds the client assets. For safety reasons, not just hold the assets, but for safety reasons, the client always has the ability to go directly into their account at the custodian to see their account. Statements are generated by that custodian. They're required to generate statements. Nowadays, mostly all delivered electronically or made available electronically. So that will always be there. However, it is fairly common nowadays that RIAs want to be able to provide their own reports to their clients as well. And maybe that's because they want to be able to show the data in additional ways that there's not just reflected on a typical statement, perhaps showing performance over some period of time in the account. They want a more branded experience. So to be able to make that kind of client packet, that performance report, whatever you want to call it, That's another feature that's typical used in a portfolio management tool. And that's something that you would decide in your own practice how you would use it. So is that something you were going to automatically create on some sort of systematic timeline and deliver to your clients? Or is that, hey, when you do your perhaps twice annual sit down with the client, that's something that you prepare in anticipation of the meeting and bring it in to discuss it with them? That's all things you as the RIA have the flexibility to decide, but you need some sort of tool to help you compile that. Again, some powerful features of what's comprised of those reports, the order it's demonstrated in, how it's branded for your practice, all kinds of things. So that we'll call it performance reporting is a typical component as well. Now, related to that and your clients being able to see things, another common component is that these tools deliver as a way for you to give your clients access to a often referred to as a client portal. So while the client always, again, for industry safeguarding purposes, has the ability to go directly into their account with the custodian, it is typical, certainly of an RIA of size, that says, hey, client, go to our website, log into your account. We have a link on there. It goes to a client portal. That client portal is pulling the data from the custodian behind the scenes and then presenting it to the client, typically in a much more visual brand or on-brand perspective of the RIA itself, that the client can see perhaps all their accounts in one place, and maybe you've had it so performance reports are available for download or whatever the case is. That's typically thought of as a client portal. That becomes particularly helpful if you're using more than one custodian, which a lot of larger RIAs do have eventually, not necessarily from the beginning. More than one custodian, that on that website of yours in the client login link, as opposed to that being a drop down and these clients, if you use this custodian, it's this link, and these other clients, it's a different link. Typically, what you see is a lot of RIAs is they know that it's a sole link that goes to the client portal, and behind the scenes, the client portal is pulling the data from the custodian. But again, for safeguarding reasons, because unfortunately there are bad apples out there, that if someone out there wanted to manipulate those reports on the front end somehow, or the client portal somehow, they could manipulate it of what they showed the client can always verify for themselves by going directly to the custodian. But typically for the client's ease and brand purpose and presentation, you send them just to the client portal and they can see everything front and center. So that's another big feature. And then the last one I'll just mention, and it's interesting that we're seeing this evolution continue, that now kind of more and more of these portfolio management tools are also incorporating a CRM into this. So whether that's they've built a CRM on their own, or they've acquired a third-party CM provider that they have now attempted to integrate very well into their portfolio management tool, I think we probably evolved to the point where all of the so-called portfolio management tools will at least have a CRM function. Now, whether you choose to use the CRM function that comes with your portfolio management tool, or whether you choose to still retain and use a separate third-party CRM, there's pros and cons to both approaches. But I think we will see it where they all will eventually get to where at least it's available for your usage. And they would argue this is the most integrated solution, to look how easy it is to move data from the CRM to the performance report, the client portal, whatnot. And there's a lot of truth to that. But there's also a reason some folks prefer to keep a CRM entirely separate as well. But just know that it's continuing to evolve, and perhaps there'll come a time in the future where I'm not starting an episode like this by saying there's three main pieces. It might evolve to the point where there's two main pieces, because CRM has become so built into portfolio management tools that maybe that's where the future's going. And who knows, it could be that case with financial planning tools as well one day. But right now, generally speaking, while it continues to evolve, there's usually those three separate components that are being brought together. So those are just some of the main features, but I'll leave you with some final thoughts here again on this topic. For starters, if you are building your own tech stack, and if you need a portfolio management tool, again, there are some custodial solutions where the client fee build is built into the custodial offer, and the client portal is built in, the performance reporting features are built in, the trade-in is built in, and there's reasons you might prefer to have a custodian that offers that as part of the custodial offer in itself. So kind of before you're picking a portfolio management tool, you generally want to pick your custodian first, because arguably a much bigger, longer term decision, and you want to get that for sure correct. So you pick your custodian, then you kind of back into the technology needed, but you'd be mindful of how that's going to impact your technology as you're deciding amongst the custodians. By the way, that's a big part of what I do, is helping advisors and team understand all the custodians that are out there, how they all differ, how all these variables could impact other things as well. Certainly happy to have that conversation with you. But if you are going to have a portfolio management tool, as we've been talking about, just know it is by far the most expensive part of the tech stack that you will build. By far, it is more expensive compared to a CRM or a financial planning tool or a risk scoring software, those sorts of things. So it is a big decision. It is something you will want to put a lot of thought and due diligence into deciding which of these solutions. Of course, I can help you figure that out as well. But just know it's the most expensive piece. It is a big decision in this process. Now, related to that, because these tools continue to evolve, in some ways that's a wonderful thing because they keep adding all kinds of features and some really cool stuff that you can use with your team members, that you can use with your clients, that you can use with your fellow advisor colleagues there at the RIA. But don't default to assuming that the fanciest tool or the tool with the most features is necessarily the best for you. Now, well, one, because that might also be the most expensive solution, so that's maybe not necessarily the best fit for you. But even if you took price out of it, well, you need to look at it and say, okay, realistically speaking, let me understand all of the features of this tool, but realistically speaking, how many of those am I actually going to implement into my practice? So I don't have the stats. I'm sure the portfolio management tools themselves do of kind of usage stats, if you will. So if there's 30 different bells and whistles that a portfolio management tool can provide for you, what percent of those is the average RIA actually using? I would even venture to guess it's 50%, if not lower, just because there have been so many cool features built out. And sometimes those features are built out because some subset of advisors and RIAs are asking for those tools, and with enough demand, the portfolio management tool spends the resources to build that or buy that into their offering. But there might be a lot of other advisors that have no interest in doing that, or they don't have the inclination or the time to do it, or just realistically, they're just so busy they'll never get around to it. So long-winded way of saying, don't default and assume that one of the most features is necessarily going to be best for you, because you want to say, okay, which one has the most features that I'm going to actually use? And I only want to pay for something for what I'm mostly actually going to use, and that may or may not be the first one you look at. So keep that in mind. Another thought, and this thankfully is slowly dying off, but there's long been a misconception, and at one time it was accurate, that, the technology in the RIA space is inferior to the wirehouse space. Now, if you go back 20, 25 plus years ago, that was absolutely correct, that the wirehouse technology was better than what was available in the RIA space. And a large part of why that was the case is it cost a lot of money and resources to develop good technology. And a single wirehouse that developed their technology had a bigger pool of users, their advisors, to spread that cost across than, this is 20 plus years ago, than any one standalone tool trying to support RIAs had as customers. And so when they don't have as many customers for their tool, they can't reinvest as much back in the platform, and arguably they weren't able to keep up. So there's a time wirehouse folks would say, the technology over there is inferior. Look at this great stuff we have now. That is now completely flip-flopped because of the evolution of the RIA technology space. There are now standalone tools in this space, or portfolio management tools as an example, that have far more end users as advisors than any one wirehouse has total advisors to spread that across. Sometimes a magnitude more of that. So now, if anything, those economics have shifted where more users, more opportunity to reinvest back in the platform. And so now when you look at what's available in the RIA space, the technology is not only better, but you have many more options to choose from of what technology you want to use. And like I said, literally there are hundreds of fintech solutions out there available for you to choose from. You might not want to entertain all of those hundreds, but when you're in the RIA space, you at least have the flexibility to do that. So if some tool is available that will make your practice more efficient or enable you to provide more value for your clients, and you want to use it, you absolutely can. Now there's logistics and costs and everything you want to consider, but if you're in that traditional wirehouse W-2 space, as you know, if you've tried this, you don't just get to go use whatever technology you use. You either have to use what they provide, or if there's some tool you wish that they would add or incorporate, all you can do is ask and pray and sit back and complain and hope that one day they actually accomplish that, and they may or may not. Meanwhile, your competition in the independent space, the RIA space, is out there using it today, perhaps chasing the same prospective clients as you are, yet can provide more value or better marketing with technology that they can use to get in front of those clients than you have available to you now. So don't listen to anyone that says, oh, the technology is not as good as in the RIA space as it is in the wirehouse space. If anything, it's now the exact opposite of that. And then the final thing I'll say is, don't get intimidated by any of this of, okay, wow, Brad's talking about there's different custodians and some have technology, some don't. That's got to depend on or drive what third-party technology I have, and there's hundreds of options, and there's the 3 core pieces, but each of those core pieces have multiple options. Don't be intimidated by that. That's a large part of what I help advisors and team with, is understand, okay, what order do you need to be making these decisions in? Let's start with the custodian, then we'll move to portfolio management. Depends on that, we'll then drive, start with custodian, then we move to tech stack, and depends on that, we'll determine what pieces in the tech stack. And then once we confirm the pieces, then we talk about the different solutions in the marketplace. That is a just one example. There's a lot of variables that have to be solved for, but that's what I help advisors with, is understand all of this. It is nothing to be intimidated by. There's a process for how you have to work through it. You just need to lean on someone that knows the process, that has done the process hundreds of times, and can help walk you down that same process as well. So like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, and as I noted, this is just one example of what I help advisors and teams with, is understanding where does technology come into the equation, where does the portfolio management tool come into the equation, or perhaps not come into the equation. I'm happy to have that conversation with you as well. First things first, though, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, again, you can find all of the resources we make available for this entire series in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers, and at the top page of every page of the website is a contact link. Click on that and you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.